Quad 66, a little bit different video for me. In this one is a little bit of discussion on how I planned out this build, where did this thing come from, and so what's the point of it. And I haven't really done one of those that I know of, I think. Maybe I have. But anyway, so this build here, unfortunately, this isn't for me. And I say that unfortunately because I really like the way it's starting to look and come together. But this build is actually for my son. So my son's turning 8, and his current outdoor, flyers, this is a 1S on 1102s, and with 7, 8-year-olds, you're kind of dealing with a couple of things and some opinions, and so you got to work around those. On this one, he's got these HQ props because they were orange, and he likes orange, and so the props become orange. And this same sort of decisions come into play a little bit on this, in that he wants what he wants and maybe not necessarily what he needs. And so what he wanted was 2S. He wanted a little bit more punch, a little bit more pop. And so although I want to give him those things, I need to give him those things in a format that he's really going to be able to control and enjoy. Otherwise, it's pointless, and this thing's going to be bound to his radio, and it's going to sit there, and I can't fly it either. And if I break it, then he's real mad, so I shouldn't fly it. But I wanted to give it to him in a really controllable format. So my idea was to keep this really light, go up to the 3-inch tri-blade props. So these are the 3016s. There are HQ props, the new T65 tri-blades, which I think would work on like an 1102 build, maybe 1103 build. And if I was building for myself, I'd actually probably be building something more like this, going for a little bit more nimble than controllable. But this is for my son, and so to make it controllable, I wanted to do a couple things. And so wanted to do these Gemfan 3016s. Now on 2S, the issue is that all the motors so far that people have been using or testing, they're basically do great on 3S and not 2S. So these 1202.4s, they're too big, heavy, and low kV for 2S. This thing is just pointless on 2S. This basically kind of can match it, and it's just, you're just not, for the weight, it's not worth it. So and on these 1202.5s, they also, like Flywoo makes them in a 5800 kV, and that's like close, but I don't think it's quite there enough. So what I decided to do was roll the dice and say, let me try these gnarly FPV 1203s, because on paper they're 1203 and they're 7600 kV. And this is, I'm sure, more power than my son needs, but I'm not trying to just deliver him power, I'm trying to deliver him the controllability. And so one of the issues here is the lack of authority over the prop, kind of that spooling up effect. And what I want to do is I want to give him that nice, crisp, instant kind of control, and so give enough motor so that you can control the prop. And hopefully that results in a nice balance. The other thing I wanted to do was, okay, so then there are other points of the build. So that's why I picked the motors and the props. And then that puts me on a 120 millimeter frame, because that's what I've been designing around to fit the 3-inch props. The other thing that happened is, so you notice that this is a Mamba 16x16 stack, and that is a little bit harder to build with, but it's got two advantages. One of the advantages, like on this board here, I fried one of the things by landing in the dog bowl, but I'm going to be able to replace the top board, FC, and for like, what was it, $12, $13, and maybe a little more than that. I think it's $15. But I can replace one board instead of two, and that saves a little bit of cash. But that's not really actually the main point. The main point is I built this up, and he really liked the style. And so when I was asking him what he wanted the 16x16 stack because he liked the way this one looked. But since I'm thinking about, I want to give him the ultimate control in this quad, this 120 millimeter frame, although it's nice to work on because you got, look at that, you got like just tons of real estate in there, and it's easy to fit everything in. But that pushes the weight out, and that gives your motors and your props and everything less leverage over controlling the weight that's in the middle. And so I wanted to try and optimize that. And so what I did is I pushed everything in, and I might have pushed it in a little bit too far. I got to try this, build it up with a 25x25 board and see, make sure it fits. But you can see how we got really tight really fast. But it does fit. And then also because it's for my son, and I want to get the canopy as like stiff as possible, I'm going to try and go with this more triangular design versus, you can see how this one in the back is rounded. So when you round it like that and bend it and put it on a bend, you got more room, more real estate to work with, but that's going to be a little bit more give. And so with everything being tucked in, I wanted to get a nice triangular rigid structure, so that if there are crashes, those forces aren't transmitted hopefully into the stack and breaking screws, because I am using Malin screws to get the weight down. So then once I have that kind of mapped out, then the next step is where to do the VTX, and the VTX is really kind of driven by where the solder points are for it. And so on this Mamba stack, all those VTX solder points are kind of right there, right there along that line. So what happens is this VTX naturally kind of fits in, and this is a RunCam VTX, which I don't think I'm going to order again because it is just a little bit bigger than, it's about the size of the eSheen, and which is bigger than the Who Cares. But anyways, with really short wires, you can kind of almost pin this together to where you've got a nice solid contact point for the VTX to mount it in there, and then just a tiny little bit of foam tape underneath it should secure it nicely. Or if you're worried about heat, you can hang it off the rafters. You can hang it off these the rails on the canopy to give a little space between the flight controller and the VTX, and get the VTX up in the air to keep it cool. So did that there, and that doesn't leave a whole lot of space for a receiver, which is like kind of the one compromise I sort of made is, on 2S I'd like to be able to have a longer range receiver, but in this case, due to space restrictions, I thought, let me go ahead and use the XM. And so there's enough room behind the camera to kind of slide it down in there. And so it's going to sit in there right behind the camera like that. Again, tiny bit of foam tape, and that should keep it all nice and snug. And I am going to have to run some wires a little bit of distance, because the solder points on the flight controller for the receiver are on these back area here. So I'm going to take the wires out through there and then route them up to the front. But that should still be pretty clean because I can hide it between the layers of the board. Then this worked out pretty well, where the capacitor is about the same width as the camera, so you can just kind of tuck it right in there, and then that gets you with super short distance that you have to get the capacitor soldered to the board. So that should be nice and easy to secure and nice and tucked in. And you can see with all that stuff in there, it's like we really kind of compacted in all our mass and put it all in one nice tight space. So I think the props and the motors are going to have a ton of leverage over that weight that's really going to be in the middle. So that's pretty nice. This little devil horns on top, I'm not sure if I'm going to leave them that way or trim them back. They do potentially give a little bit of protection if you land upside down. I got to see where they line up in the video, whether they're in camera. If I need to short them, I'm just going to short them a little bit. I might even turn it into kind of the hat style with a little extra shrink tubing like I did on that one. You can see how it makes a nice little hat for it. So in terms of like kind of like obsessiveness, I get pretty obsessed on the details of these builds, but when I'm designing these frames, what I'm trying to do is try and keep the props off of the frame and off of the battery and stuff like that, because there's no point in throwing a bunch of thrust into these flat structures and create turbulent air and waste efficiency. And so, although it seems like it'd be super easy to just go ahead and push these spaces out by maybe like 2 millimeters or something on either side, give a little bit more room and have some more room to work with, but then what happens is, to push it out a couple millimeters, that's going to move this forward, and then that's going to move that bar more underneath the prop to the point where I might start getting really obsessive and compulsive about it and say, well, I got to stretch the frame, and then now if I'm throwing 2 millimeters on each arm, I'm going from 120 to 124 millimeter frame, and to me that's sort of like a little like mental I don't know, like line. I want to try and keep these small. You know, obviously this is pretty small, right? There's my hand. It's pretty tiny, and I want to keep them that way, even with the 3-inch props. I want to keep them small, keep the profile small. That's how you get through the gaps and keep it fun and nimble in a small backyard. And also, these frames are actually, they're not that easy to just stretch, because these arms, the curvature of the arm, the narrow point is actually in the middle of the arm, so the narrowest point, which is what you want to do, because you want your biggest stress risers are at the points where it's more fixed. And so this is fixed either because it hits the ground and it makes a fixed point there, or where the frame is, the fixed point's there. And so what you want is the wider there, and where it naturally bends, you want it in the middle. And what that means is if I push this out, I basically have to redo the whole frame, and these little mounts are ridiculously tight. Like it takes a while to like get them the way they are, because everything's like a little bit off axis and stuff like that. And so it's basically just to stretch this out by a couple millimeters is actually a full redesign on that frame. So I hope it works out as is. What else? Oh, last piece. So this is the part that kind of kills me. So these 16 by 16 stacks, they make just such a nice little, you know, low frontal area, super efficient kind of look to it. And with these 300 milliamp batteries, and these are the short style, you can put that in, and this isn't sitting totally flush because I got to cut those screws shorter to length, but you can see that when you get that battery under there, that is such a nice tight little package. Like it's just not, it's not pushing hardly any wind at all compared to a lot of the builds that that are out there in common. And so that like really boosts your ability to get a lot of performance out of these. It might be worthwhile for performance wise to get the balance the weight on the axis. So for example, turning the battery sideways to put it on the roll axis instead of the pitch axis, you're going to balance things a little bit, but obviously if you're doing that, you're going to be pushing more air. Now for my son, that probably makes sense, because really we're not trying to get speed, we're trying to get handling out of this. But if you're trying to build something that on really small batteries can get going really fast, then you probably want to hide it a little bit, and then also maybe go to the bi-blades, the 3018s, if what you're looking for is all-out speed on a tiny light package. Anyways, that's how I think about my builds, and plan them out and map them out. And I don't know, maybe you think that this is just pointless rambling, maybe you find it helpful. That's what goes into it. I'll leave you with a couple little Easter eggs, and that is, see that hole right there and right there? The purpose of those is that finally we have something that we can mount Tiny Hawk boards on. And we'll be doing something like that, a little update to the Whoopster. But anyways, till next time, cheers.